Hi guys, my name is Joanna, and today I wanted to actually do kind of a follow-up video to one that I had just done related to parenting intuitive children. And I wanted to do a follow-up video to talk a little bit more about how to be supportive to these new wave of kids. A prior video kind of talked about, I think, common patterns that I see in the kids that tend to come into my practice, and some of the things that they face, and just encouragement to parents in general on how to be supportive. But I actually wanted to be even just more specific and give some more concrete ways of how to support these kids, whether you're a parent, a professional, a family member, it doesn't matter. But so again, like what I said in my prior video, what I've noticed is in these new generations, we have these children who are born, and how I describe it is really open. They're born with really strong intuitive abilities. It's not uncommon to find that in children in anyway, but like these younger ones coming in are really gifted. They're really coming in at a higher level. And what I see happen to these little ones is they get really overwhelmed in this world. It's a very kind of brain bloated place, and they're just very emotional beings, and they're very perceptive, and that's hard. It's hard to be a child that might be more perceptive than the typical adult around them, and to be very aware of patterns, and to be stressed by these patterns of being that don't make sense to them. And what I mean is, a lot of times these children really have a hard time with other people's pain. They're very empathic. Not all intuitive kids are empathic, but a lot of these kids that I see come through are really empathic. They're really insightful. They're sort of like, 65-year-old 5-year-olds. So they're just old souls, and they look around this life and they have a hard time understanding why people do what they do. So an example is, if they're seeing things on television related to crime or to pain and suffering, they can get very stressed by this. They can actually, many will feel the pain of the people experiencing the pain, and they get very, very burdened with these terrible things that happen to others. It doesn't make sense to them. They feel helpless, and it's really sad and really stressing to them. And so a typical reaction from adult around them is to tell them not to worry about it, and they just can't not worry. That's just not their nature. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is how to support these kids. It is my sense that these kids are born open, and are meant to remain open. We're needing them. We need this light. We need this energy. And because of that, it's really important that those who are aware that they have someone, a little person with these abilities, do their best to be a support to them, no matter the role they play. So one of the things that I really talk about is just really learning how to communicate with these kids. It's a disservice, I should say, to minimize or invalidate the experience that these kids are having. Sometimes it's hard to look at a little person who seems to have such a mature and adult awareness of what's going on, and we almost want to buffer them from this and have them be these innocents, and have an unawareness. And so sometimes I've seen adults kind of negate the truth. So let's say there's people starving or something happening that a child has come across, and they're stressing. It might get minimized. And I encourage you not to do this with these kids. Because what you start to do is you start to actually foster a distrust. Not only a distrust of you as being someone that is not truthful, but a distrust of themselves and their own perceptions. These kids are aware, and the awareness is not the problem. It causes them stress, but the bigger concern is helping them learn tools on how to manage this information, because they are going to have a lot of flooding their whole life. They're going to get information and awareness insight into things that, maybe that you as an adult would not want for them, and probably what they don't want themselves, but just can't help because they're just born open. So my encouragement is never invalidate or minimize what it is that they're feeling or noticing. Allow for that to be the truth and validate their feelings. So if they see something and they're crying because it's not understandable to them, like why someone might be suffering, validate that sadness, validate that must be really hard for them to see another person's pain, and that it is sad to see that, and that's okay to be sad. And when you sit in that space with them, it's really reassuring. Even though you're validating that this negative thing has happened, it's reassuring to them because they feel like you're present with them. And that is really critical to these kids. Most of the kids I see, they feel alone, and that's where the struggle for them begins. It's not always the emotionality, it's the fact that they have this emotionality and they feel alone with it because the people around them are, trying to be helpful, but are doing so in a way that just makes them feel like what they're sensing is wrong or what they're feeling is wrong. And so they tend to shut down, and that's where they go into kind of troubled waters. They're just meant to remain open. So as I said, a big thing is just validating their sadness, and leaving it at that. You don't have to, no attaching buts like, yes, it's sad, but, blah, 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 blah. No rationality. Just sit in the space with them several times, like, yeah, it's really sad. I bet that's really hard for you to see someone so sad or see someone struggling, or, and then they would likely will respond yes, or they might get tearful and just say, I understand your sadness. It's hard to see that type of thing, and circle through that a few times. And then what I encourage is, once you validate their emotional experience or validate the fact that they are seeing something that is real, encourage them to learn tools on how to manage that sadness. So it's not that they can't feel sad, it's okay. So these sad things happen. What can you do to make yourself feel better? What do you think would make you feel better right in this moment? And help them start to understand what they have control over and what they don't, and what they can do for themselves to move and kind of pivot out of these negative emotional states. And this is so critical to their well-being. This is so much of the work that I do with these kiddos, is just help them learn how to manage the flow of this information and the flow of their emotionality. And they are troopers. These kids are strong, and they are interested in learning these skills. So coaching them can be kind of easy sometimes because they're just really open to these suggestions and they'll try them. They're sometimes more brave than some of the adults that I work with, because they just roll out change like it's nothing. So they're impressive. I mean, it's pretty impressive to have an 8-year-old practicing meditation, but I've seen it, it's done in here. And I think it's amazing and awesome, and it's encouraging. So communication is a huge thing. The other thing is really helping kids, intuitive children, normalize. So they know they're different. They can tell that they're different. It's pretty evident to them when they're responding in maybe intensive ways or just in really differing ways from other people, whether it be adults or peers. So normalize their difference. Don't pretend that they're the same, because they're not, and they know it. But you don't have their differences don't have to be negative, and that's how they tend to see it. So what I generally do is, if I have a child, especially an empathic one, I will recognize, yes, you are different, but let me explain to you how you're different. And what I try to explain is, your body is just really sensitive. You're really sensitive to feedback. So sometimes you're going to feel a lot, and you might notice that you seem to feel more than another person, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing. And I will actually tell these kids, so because of that, you're really aware. You see things, and you know how things are, and that makes you actually more mature. You kind of function on a higher level than the people around you, and I explained that it doesn't make them better, but that they just are going to see things in a different way, and it's actually a gift. And you should see the kids perk up. So many of them end up crying because they start to see that this is actually a positive thing. But then I also acknowledge, though this is really a gift, it is a responsibility. The thing is because you do feel a lot, and you're going to feel more than maybe some other people, it's really important for you to learn the skills to manage it. So it's not a negative thing that you feel a lot, but you want to learn how to manage it so you're not feeling stressed a lot, because you can go into a negative state, and nobody wants to be in that spot. So let's talk about ways that you can cope with that. And so when I normalize, and really talk about how this is sort of a double-edged sword. It's great that you can feel all of this stuff, but because of feeling so much, you're going to feel overwhelmed, and that there's other kids like them, and just explaining the differences. They really integrated into self, and their differences are seen as more positive than negative. Because again, these children often get feedback that they're overreacting, they're being oversensitive, they need to grow up, but the reality is they're really mature, they're really emotionally intelligent, and sometimes way more than most people around them, and that's a hard place to be as a child. And children see themselves through the eyes of the adults, especially their parents. So if they're getting negative feedback, they're going to internalize that and consider themselves to be negative beings. So it's really important for us to be very careful about our word choicing, but very normalizing too. So I really like to take away the mystery. I like to have really open discourse with these kids about what it is they're experiencing, what they might notice in their body, how they might respond, and what they can do to feel better in the moment. So it doesn't have to be this big deal. It's not a secret. It's not this terrible thing. It's uncomfortable, but it's not this terrible thing. So the other thing I really help with the kids is talk about things that they already do that makes them feel better. A lot of these intuitive children are very sensory, so you will often see that they might gravitate towards certain activities. They might really like to be outside. They might really like to hang out in a hammock. They might really like to color. They might like to do clay, like love squishies, like whatever it is they like to do that's a really quiet activity, non-electronic based. I encourage you to promote that in their lives, and help them understand that even though they enjoy it, it's actually a coping tool. It's one way that they can learn to manage if they're feeling really overwhelmed. I like to make a list of all these different activities that they can do. We either write it down, or if they're even littler, they can put a picture on. We've created what I've called stress boxes, so that, if they do get really flooded and just kind of get real dysregulated, meaning like maybe they just kind of have fits, just have panic attacks, just get so emotional they can't handle themselves, the brain really shuts down in that moment. So it's easier just to kind of go towards something and have it already set up. So like a stress box is just a box with a bunch of sensory tools that they can just go and like play with and calm down, and help them understand that it takes probably about 20 minutes to shift emotional state. So if they're feeling stressed, if they're feeling overwhelmed, sad, that they can go and do these activities, and I encourage that they go and try these activities and do this for 20 minutes before going and problem solving with parents. I really like to help them learn how to regulate their own bodies, and when they can calm down, they're going to be way easier to talk to and help kind of encourage through problem solving. But we can't jump over the emotionality. It's really important that it's addressed, it's validated, it's normalized, and that they learn the coping strategies to kind of go from a really heightened state to a calmer state. And when they do that, their brain, their thinking brain, the executive functioning part of their brain comes back online. But it does take a good, at least solid 20 minutes for all of us, whether kids or we're adults, to make that shift. So I call that self-soothe. So self-soothe is another really critical thing for these kids, and it literally can be anything as long as it's not electronic based. So anything, reading if they're able to, playing games, being outside, riding bikes, jumping on the trampoline, anything. Another suggestion I have as far as supporting intuitive children is never be fearful to seek out other professional services. So these kids, I've referred a lot of them to like OT, occupational therapy. I can tell like sometimes their sensory system isn't fully integrated, so you can just see them like they have maybe an auditory sensitivity, or they have a sensory need. So it can be really helpful for them to learn additional therapeutic kind of games and tasks, because if we feed the sensory needs of their body, not only does their body start to really integrate on a sensory level, so they might actually start to reduce their sensitivity, but it's really regulating for how they feel. So if you have someone, or if you've ever experienced where like a lot of times I have folks who have an auditory sensitivity, right? Like you just can't filter out like the person smacking their food or drumming their fingers on the table or whatever it is, like, and the more you try to block it out, the louder it gets in your head. And so it's really common for intuitive kids to have these kind of sensitivities, and then they get so dysregulated, like stresses them, that they get emotionally off track too, and so they start to cry, they might leave a room, they might start to avoid rooms or places that have a lot of this type of thing. So OT can be helpful in trying to help them integrate that, but a lot of times OT catches ways that they can really self-soothe. And again, our body and our mind are so connected, so if we find ways that relax our body, and inherently relaxes us on an emotional level, so it's another awesome avenue to support these kids. Counseling is a great one. Anything that you think could be skill building for them. Myself as a therapist, I'm really resistant to assigning labels to kids because they're growing and developing and their brain isn't fully mature, that I really tend to steer away from labeling. So instead of like diagnosing someone with anxiety, we might talk about being anxious, but I really don't like to assign labels to kids. I feel like so many of them can learn skills and kind of pivot out of patterns, that they don't need to sort of have this be stigmatized for them. I would rather just talk about it in a really normalizing kind of healthy way of, yeah, you have a hard time with anger, so let's talk about how you can deal with it so you don't feel like you struggle with anger, instead of saying that someone has anger management issues, if that makes any sense. So counseling is a great avenue for these kids. A lot of them like to talk, and it can help be supportive not only to the child but likely to the parents. I know for myself, I see kids as extensions of their family, so it's always my goal to work with kids and teach them skills, but I also teach the parents the skills as well, so that they can cue their child to go do these self-soothes and can learn how to be really open in communication and very validating, because most parents who are bringing their kids into counseling are really motivated in their parent-child relationship, and that is so critical. That to me is so necessary for these kids, to have this awesome rapport with parents where they can talk about tough things. And a lot of times parents are doing their best and really trying to do things in a loving, helpful way, and it just sort of backfires. So skill coaching too with parents on how to manage this, because we tend to do more than we need to, and actually the doing of more is what complicates these interchanges with these kids, where we're trying to push them into a state of calm versus allow for them to be stressed and trust in their willingness and desire to move out of that, and talk about, so what do you think you can do right now to calm down, and let them do it versus like try to just pick them up and transplant them in happiness. It doesn't teach them anything, and a lot of times they actually feel really invalidated, though of course parents are just not wanting to see their child in stress, so obviously it's with love, but like I said, it can sometimes actually cause a rift. So seeking any sort of professional supplement services, anything with the body is really helpful. Like these kids tend to be very creative as well. They tend to really ground in nature, so you know, like not even being opposed to doing equine therapy, which is like horse therapy, or you know, anything, any camps, any activities that kind of puts them in nature and helps them interface with kids that also enjoy the same thing, so they can develop a social group and a peer group that might be more similar to them, which is going to be really important, because a lot of these intuitive kids, they're very friendly, they're very loving, but are likely really in need of kids similar to them, because social stuff can really stress them out, and if they have a friend group where there's a lot of negative patterns, it's going to really bother them. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to be able to just let go. It's just not their nature to dismiss negative things. It just doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't resonate with them. So helping them learn to navigate those waters in an age-appropriate way can be really helpful. So, you know, kids, especially littler ones, it's really about blending. So when they don't feel like they're blending, that's really painful for them. They feel like they're on the outside, and just encouraging them to not care about that is not going to be helpful to them, because it's their whole world at that phase of life. As adults, we might be more tolerant of not being included, but as kids, that's everything. And sometimes as adults, we encourage kids to do things that's more adult-like, that would just blow up, you know, in a 10-year-old's social circle. So having therapeutic resources or consults can be really helpful in helping these kids to navigate. And honestly, the more loving adults who are supportive of these kids and encouraging, the better. These kids are going to just be a lot of energy, but they give so much. They have a lot of output too, so we need to value that. And the other thing I want to talk about with intuitive children is that their personalities really range. Like, I think sometimes we might not understand that a child who's actually extraordinarily strong-willed and seemingly defiant could be very well a very highly intuitive child. We see them sometimes as being behavioral because they're stubborn, and they sometimes just are going to do what they're going to do. But the beauty of them is that they tend to be warriors, and they tend to have a really strong sense of integrity. And so unless they feel like matches what they think needs to be done, they're not going to do it. And so parenting these kids can be really hard, because it's very easy to get into a power struggle with these kids. But these kids are often the advocates for others. They're often leaders, and so sometimes, again, we mistake these kids as being defiant or behavioral, and they're actually very intuitive kids with a really strong sense of self, who are here to lead and to protect others. It's just that when they're tiny, it comes out as a lot of defiance and a lot of sassiness and stubbornness, and it can be really difficult because obviously sometimes with littler people, they may be making choices that aren't best for themselves, but these kids also tend to be very experiential, meaning like they're not going to learn unless they do. And so sometimes we have to learn to step back and trust these kids and let them have experiences of learning, obviously keeping safety in mind. But you know, if they forget their jacket on a cold day and it's not going to cause them irreparable harm, you might have to allow for that, for them to really want to bring their jacket versus try to get into a power struggle of making them have jackets, and things like that. But just recognizing again the long-term pattern that these kids tend to be leaders, and they are here for a purpose, and it's our goal to not break their spirit, though that can be maddening as we're raising them. So intuitives and empaths can look very different. Every child is very unique in their personality and their background, and so don't assume that an intuitive child is one that is just harmonious and super loving and super malleable. Some of these kids are firecrackers, and they're warriors, and they will fight you tooth and nail in every single thing. So the array of offerings is huge from these kids, and they really present differently. So there's not one way that they look or act, but usually a big sign for me is big feelings, big feelings, big strong feelings to sometimes what we would consider little things. That's a really huge sign of someone who is very likely an intuitive child. As adults and parents around these kids, don't buffer them from your feelings. Don't hide away your feelings from them. They do what you do. So if you are having a bad day and you're pretending that you're not, they know. They know. Trust me, they know. And they will internalize that. But and they will also start to have the understanding that we can't talk about things, and you don't want that. You want these kids to feel like they can talk to you. They will differ. Some will be very expressive and some might be more quiet, but you always want that path open where they feel like they can come and tell you things that worry or scare them. So you need to model as an adult, no matter your role. If you're having a bad day and that child is reflecting it by saying that they notice, you know, Mama, are you stressed? Or teacher, or Miss Mary, you seem sad. And if you are, don't lie. Don't lie. Just be honest. And you can do so with still placing boundaries and say, yes, I'm having actually a hard day today, but you don't need to worry about that. I'm okay, and I will take care of myself. And you can validate that, yes, they had an accurate read, which is really reinforcing and actually very self-esteem promoting. But you also set the boundary that they don't need to take care of you. So you're buffering the need for them to feel like they have to be an adult and caretake your issues. But you are being honest with them and giving them feedback that their read is accurate. And that's really reinforcing. It doesn't stress them out. It stresses them out more to feel like you're stressed and you're saying you're not stressed and it's not matching and they don't understand and they feel conflicted and they feel like they're not, it just makes them doubt themselves, and we just don't want that. So don't be afraid to be honest, and like I said, you just set a boundary that they're not responsible for making you feel better. They don't need to do that. They will likely attempt to like give you a hug or something. You can say, well, thank you for that, but it's not your job to make me feel better, and kind of help them redirect. And they're usually pretty redirectable after that. They're often just seeking out that acknowledgement and validation. So it's fairly easy to just kind of keep on going. So be the model. Make it okay to talk about difficult things. The other thing is, because these intuitive kids have different experiences, they may bring forth things like seeing things, hearing things, noticing things that you don't. Some people might have a tendency to pathologize this as, oh my gosh, they're seeing something, like they must be schizophrenic. But if you're just getting the sense that they're seeing things in other dimensions and it's not worrisome to you as far as it being a mental health thing, but you don't experience it or you don't know how to reply, just listen and validate. If you don't have a response, don't lie, and don't fret. Like, you can say, you know what, that's really interesting, I don't know much about that, let's research that together, or what have you, and seek out answers. If you have a fear response, they're going to start to get afraid of this. And of their experiences. But if you don't, and you're honest, even if you don't know, they're forgiving of that. That's okay. They'll just follow you. If you're like, let's figure this out, they will just follow you and they will feel loved and supported. So you don't have to have all the answers or always know exactly what to say. If you don't know what to say, my encouragement is to listen and validate. You can never go wrong with that. Sometimes we say things because we have this need to fill the space, and that's where we do damage. So if you're uncomfortable and you don't know what to say, then my encouragement is listen, validate, and leave it at that. You can always loop back at a different time when you've thought it through and be like, hey, I just wanted to bring up that conversation we had and I was thinking more about it. Kids are amazing. They're so open to that, and it's just a really great way to circle back and just really have enhanced and deepened communication. So don't feel like you have to do everything in that single moment. You don't. You can even ask for time. Like, I don't even know what to think about this. I need some time, and let's talk about this maybe tonight or whatever. And then make a point to circle back and do that. Don't just let it go, because the likelihood is they're watching and waiting to see if you do, and that's validating. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. It's just a lot of strategies to be really communicative and emotionally supportive of these tiny beings. These kids are amazing. I adore them. It's so fun. You can learn so much from these kids, and it's just, they're powerhouses. And it's just, the world is going to benefit from them, but the world is just constructed in a way right now that just doesn't necessarily support them. So it's really important that the adults who are in these kiddos' lives provide that for them. And that is amazing, because they will take that and they will run. They thrive on this. And helping them learn how to navigate themselves through things is amazing. They will do it, and you will just have your socks knocked off. I mean, these kids are just incredible. So I hope that was helpful. Feel free to like the video if you like it, subscribe, comment, share it if you know people who might benefit from this. I really want information out and gifting this to people as far as to be of service and help, so that people maybe feel more educated or informed or resourced in knowing how to navigate some of these things. So thank you for your time, and I wish you the greatest of days.